Did you know that whatever your profession might be, there might be a group that supports your practice of mindfulness within that discipline? Oh, yeah, there are a lot of them. Come on, let's learn a little bit more. Hello, and welcome to Mindfulness Voyage. This is Ted Meissner. Thank you so much for being here. Good to see you. Glad you could join me on this lovely day. A little chilly today, but a wonderful, wonderful walk in the woods. Mindfulness is less about what we do and more about how we are. And that applies to every aspect of our lives, personal parts of it and professional parts as well. Even though our conversation today is from a particular perspective of the legal profession, just know that there are lots of different special interest groups focused on supporting people being mindful in whatever profession they happen to be in. Come on, let's talk with our friend Claire Parsons about today's topic. Our guest today is Claire E. Parsons. Claire, thanks so much for being here. Good to see you.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we've connected on LinkedIn and have had a number of really encouraging engagements there. And I just wanted to have you on as a guest to talk about this particular territory of mindfulness, which is in law. So I'm wondering if you could share with us about how the Mindfulness in Law Society started and what that is.
Yeah, so I'm not one of the founding members of Mindfulness and Law Society, but it has existed for at least 5 years, maybe around 5 years. And I think it was started from a combination of private practice lawyers and law firms and also academics who are seeing some mental health issues in the profession, but we're also seeing that kind of trickle down into even the law student ranks. And so there had been an interest in creating community around mindfulness because I know when I started meditating about 10 years ago, it did feel a little bit lonely and like I couldn't tell anybody about it. And so what the Mindfulness and Law Society does is we have virtual sits twice a week that anybody can show up and join. But we've also done over the last few years in-person retreats and then some virtual ones. I became one of the guides for the virtual sits last year, and I'm still doing it this year. And then we did have a retreat in the fall that was virtual, and I participated in that. So we've got a lot of great things, and I think that there is some momentum to try some new things coming out of the pandemic still. But I think that there's a lot of growth and new chapters. And I am the founder of the Greater Cincinnati chapter because that's where I live.
Awesome. Thanks for that overview. And I'm wondering, you mentioned that this is has really grown since its inception, and I wonder if you could say a little bit more about that. I mean, when you first encountered it, what was it like, and how is it today?
Yeah, when I first encountered it, it was a few years ago, and I was a member, but I wasn't really active in it. But because of my blogging and writing and being active on LinkedIn, one of the other teachers reached out to me just because they had need for more teachers. And so what I have experienced with the group is that they are just really great about bringing people in. I will say, like being in other professional associations as a lawyer, sometimes you have to kind of pay your dues and work your way up and, work your way into the inner circle. But with these people, it's just been really open and it's been wonderful to get to know the other teachers and just to be able to teach and sit with people. And the flexibility that they give the teachers to work with them, it's been great. I've really enjoyed it.
And as you describe that, I'm wondering if that has had an influence just on how you are and with your clients in your practice. Has that seeped in a little bit there about how you present yourself when you're speaking with people?
Do you mean mindfulness practice in general?
Yeah.
I mean, it absolutely has. And I think, I don't know that really I would say that mindfulness changed my personality in any way. I think that what it did for me was allow me to be more like myself. So I do litigate cases. Now, with my current practice, I just moved to a new firm. And so litigation in court is not necessarily as much a part of my practice as it used to be, although I still do it. Now it's a little bit different in terms of more investigation and other kind of work. But I did litigate cases. I litigated things to trial. I did a lot of administrative hearings. I have done a fair amount of special ed work, which is highly emotional for both the school officials and the parents and then the other attorneys. And so I think the thing that it's really given me is stability. I don't know that it changes what I do as a lawyer. I feel though that it gives me a little bit more stability with managing the difficulty, and not necessarily reacting to it so much, and understanding that, someone else's behavior is their issue and my response can be my issue. So I think that's what it's done for me the most.
Yeah. And I'm curious, I know there's a lot on the website, and you've mentioned already a few things like retreats, for example, for those who are part of this organization. On a maybe on a personal level, or if there are other services that the organization does that you'd like to share, what might some of those be, and what are some ways in which you have interacted with others? You mentioned that you're teaching more, for example.
Yeah, so if you're talking about through the Mindfulness and Law Society, some of the things I think what that group really does more is provide community. But it is not just for practicing lawyers. So people who used to be lawyers who no longer practice as lawyers, like they got a job doing HR for a big company, they can still come to the Mindfulness and Law Society events. Students can participate, and there are some campuses, if you look at the chapter listings, there are some campuses that actually have law student organizations, or college or organizations based at the law school. We have some organizations outside of the US, so it is international, which is quite remarkable. And then we also have some paralegals and other people who work adjacent to lawyers and actually do participate. So I just want to impress upon you like the breadth of this organization. But primarily what it is providing community. So we have the events and there are sometimes webinars or workshops, but much of it is offering guiding meditation or yoga practices that can sometimes be done in an office setting. So something like chair yoga or something like that.
Yeah, it's interesting to see so much growth in a relatively young organization. To have international representation is pretty amazing. So what are some of the impacts? You mentioned that community is something that this has been providing for quite some time now, for at least 5 years. And what are some of the impacts that the others are sharing about how mindfulness is influencing their life, their profession, whatever it happens to be? You mentioned a few things for yourself, like a little more stability, a little less reactivity. Have you heard from others about the way it's impacting them?
Yeah, and I do teach outside of Mindfulness and Law Society too. I just spoke on stress management for my law firm. We had an ethics seminar within my law firm, and that was remarkable to do that for my law firm. That was the first time I got to do that. And I speak for other organizations as well. And so I do think a lot of people are interested in the stress management component of it. I do think they are often very interested in like dealing with the feelings of overwhelm, and the constant anxiety. Overthinking is the real reason that I started meditating, and the biggest impact immediately for me. Just being able to manage and be aware of thoughts and to stop that was a game changer for me. And I do hear that from a lot of other lawyers. One thing that has been surprising to me is that when I started speaking on mindfulness topics, I at first was talking to women professionals because women professionals were really interested in it. So when I started talking more broadly and I started talking to lawyers, including male lawyers, I was actually a little nervous. I thought like they might be real reluctant with the concepts. I thought they might look at me like I was a hippie, or something like that. And I practice in Kentucky and Ohio, so not the most liberal and open-minded part of the world
Not
sometimes.
bastions of hippiness. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. But honestly, I think some of it helped that I am a trial attorney, that I've done this kind of work. And the men were honestly more excited about this than a lot of the women, because I think women, they get more understanding and education on emotions and how it processes, and that they can talk to other people about their emotions, but men don't as much. And so that has been one of the real heartening things I have experienced is the openness of many men to talk about these things and to listen and to maybe even explore them for themselves.
Yeah, and I suspect that that's changing. That's becoming more and more common. My dad was a lawyer. My biological father was a lawyer. My sister's a lawyer. And 20, 30, 40 years ago, that would probably not have been the kind of response we would get. So it's good to see that changing.
Yeah.
Claire, I'm wondering if you might provide some recommendations for those who might be in the legal profession who are curious about mindfulness. What are some of the common questions that you're running into from people who are in the profession who are wondering about what this mindfulness stuff is like? What would you say to them?
Yeah, so the thing that I emphasize the most when I talk to lawyers, like it's the thing that people will call me and they say, we want you to talk about mindfulness, and I try to sneak in compassion instead. So people, they really like the reason that mindfulness, I think, or one of the big reasons that mindfulness gets a lot of the, has had the impact for people that it has is actually the compassion. So lawyers are really drawn to the mindfulness. They like the clear awareness, they like the focus, they like the idea that they can manage their thoughts. But what we're a little less comfortable with is the compassion aspect of it. And I know compassion, maybe for you, you might be cringing because it's not entirely applicable to every aspect of the heart practices, but I'm using it shorthand. But like compassion, joy, those kind of things that we can actually practice and learn, they're incredibly important for lawyers. And so when I started teaching or talking about mindfulness initially, I was really nervous about like teaching loving kindness at first. And I thought people would think it was really, something that was not for them. It was too ooey gooey. They couldn't handle it. But I tell you what, the people that experienced it, they couldn't believe it. They loved it. And that's actually why I love that practice, and all of those practices, because my experience with them is that they make the work of helping other people in hard times so much easier. Not that they make it easy, but they give you something that you can do for yourself, that you can connect to your values and with what matters, and that inspires so much courage. And so that's something that I talk about on the blog a lot. It is something that I definitely encouraged and included in my book, because it is just something that's so important, but many people don't understand it well, and so they get put off by it. And so it's something that I always try to remind people of. And with lawyers associated with that is just the importance of self-compassion, because a lot of times we don't have it. And that was one of my big downfalls earlier in life, and one of the things I learned through my meditation practice. So I would say compassion is what I try to emphasize as much as possible.
Yeah, and that is such an important aspect of mindfulness that's not just dry, bare attention, it's how we are with what we meet. And you also described quite beautifully, it's not just, not to diminish it, but not just compassion, but that self-compassion. Think about how you feel when you help somebody else. It tends to feel pretty good, and that's compassion. Well, self-compassion is something we tend not to give that same kind of kindness and care to ourselves that we do to others. But that's also something that can be rewarding too. You also mentioned your book. I wonder if you might share a few words about that too.
Yeah, so my book came out in 2022. It's my first book that I wrote by myself. It's called How to Be a Badass Lawyer. But it is teaching mindfulness and compassion. And I know you're laughing at that title, and I kind of did that title because it makes me laugh a little bit, but it is from my real life. So I had a case a couple years ago during the pandemic, and it was a case that involved like safety issues for one of my clients. And I knew we were gonna probably lose because the judge, and I'm more referring to just past decisions with the judge. So it was a really hard situation where we had something that was really bad. I had limited ability to stop it, but I had to go through it. And so one of the things I did at the beginning was at night, I would do loving kindness practice, and I did it for 3 nights. And it took me that long to acknowledge that I was just afraid and that I wasn't in control, and that there's probably nothing I can do to win the case, not get the judgment or entry that I didn't want to get. But what I connected with was that I could be a big pain in the butt if I needed to, get at the best result I could, or at least slow the thing down so it didn't create any big problems for the client. And so the next day I woke up, got to work, wrote one of the best briefs I've ever written in my life. And we had actually a really good result for the client in that we didn't get a great order, but it ended up not affecting the client in any material way. And so that was a case where I wrote a blog post about it where I said I was terrified at the beginning, but I felt like a badass on the back end because I did what I had to do for my client and I was brave, but I also took care of myself at the same time. And so that's what the book is about. And so it's a 4-week guide teaching people how to create a basic meditation practice that has, the basic elements that I think are most important. So the week 1 is breath practice. So you can create a safe container and learn some basic focus. Then there's body awareness because that's essential. Then a joy practice is a segue to loving kindness and connecting with those positive emotions. And then the final practice is loving kindness, because that's kind of the way I practice most days.
Yeah, I don't typically think of loving kindness as badass, but the way you describe it makes perfect sense. So thank you for that. And what else would you like to share with the listeners before we let you go?
One thing that I've been dealing with and sitting with a lot lately, Ted, is just the, huge increase in creativity that has happened since I started meditating. And this is by no means what I intended when I started meditating. I didn't sit down and start meditating and think I'm going to write a book someday. But what happened, as I talked about with the overthinking, what happened is I realized lots of the thoughts in my head were just garbage and I could get rid of them and let them go. But one thing I started to notice was that many of my thoughts were recurring. They would be like tiny bits of phrases or maybe an image every now and then. And I started to realize they were ideas for writing. And so that is in part how I started to write and speak on these topics, how I have a blog, A Brilliant Legal Mind, and how I wrote the book. But it's just one thing I will say is sometimes like we may start these practices and we maybe feel a little bit weird about it, or that we're having to do something extra or strange because there's some problem with us. But sometimes we might end up with this incredible gift and it can just mean so much to us. So one of the things with my mindfulness practice is just that it allows me the mental space to have ideas and then do something with them, something that actually can help the world and has helped even my law practice. So that was just one of the most surprising benefits, and it is something that just lights me up all the time.
Thank you for sharing that, because that is one of the side benefits that may occur with a mindfulness practice, is that brushing away of the stuff that gets in the way and revealing what a wonderful, creative, caring person that you can be when all that other stuff is just swept out of the way. Claire, in addition to the link for mindfulnessinlawsociety.org, are there some other links that you'd like to share here? And of course, I'll be posting those along with this episode, but what are some of those?
Well, so the blog is brilliantlegalmind.com. And then I'm also on LinkedIn, and I love talking to, frankly, anybody about this, but if any lawyers listen, I absolutely will talk to you too. So find me at Claire E. Parsons. And then the book is on Amazon as well. One thing I would strongly suggest, and I mentioned compassion for lawyers. I do have a blog post that reviews several compassion training courses, including Mindful Self-Compassion, CCT from Stanford, which was my personal favorite, and then Power of Awareness from Tara Brach and Jack Kornfield, and a small audio course from Kelly McGonigal that I really enjoyed. So if anyone is interested in understanding those things a little bit better, one of those courses is a really accessible and I think affordable way of doing it. So I can send that link to you as well after we talk.
Great. And I will be posting that along with all the other links we talked about. Our guest today, Claire E. Parsons. Claire, thanks so much for being here. Appreciate your time today.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining us today, and thanks to Claire for joining us as well. I hope we got something out of today's podcast. One of the main things about mindfulness, again, is that it's less about what we do and more about who you are and how you are in each moment. That applies to all aspects of your life. So remember, every moment you have a choice. Make it the best you can, and I'll see you next time.